Yo.
Hey man, what's going
Hey,
on?
how you
Hey,
doing?
not bad, not bad. How about yourself?
I'm doing, pretty okay. We had a fun time, completely forgetting what we were supposed to talk about earlier in stream. How are you doing? What's on your mind today? Well, actually, introduce yourself before you do or say anything.
Oh, am I on the stream right now?
Oh, yes, we're live. Yeah, we're currently streaming right now, live. So, clothing
Oh,
on,
sweet.
keep it all together.
Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Magershak. I run two companies. One of them I started 10 years ago to decentralize social networks and be an alternative to big tech like Facebook, LinkedIn, and so on. 3 years ago, I started a cryptocurrency company to enable communities around the world to issue their own currency as an alternative to sort of the current financial system. I should say complementary currencies like the ones they have in different cities. And my goal is to help decentralize power, help put the power in the hands of smaller organizations. And I believe that technology already does that. So I'm a bit of a libertarian. I lean libertarian on many issues. I critique capitalism, which I think we have in common. I also critique socialism and other things. And I try to find the most practical solutions for people. That's kind of my background.
Nice. Well, I also like to fancy myself a libertarian who doesn't like capitalism. So we have that in common. Yeah, you reached out to me a while ago, and it took us a while to arrive at this point now talking, which is entirely my fault, and I apologize for that. But
This meeting is being recorded.
Ooh, is that okay if I
oh,
record?
you can record it. I didn't know they had an alert for that. Okay, yeah, there we go.
Question: is this live stream going to be at a link? Because then I don't have to record anything. I'll just have my mug over here on your phone or wherever you are.
Yeah,
And then
the audio is being recorded, and the video is as well. Though I mean, you're in the corner, and I'm here in chats yelling in the other corner and stuff. So the audio is clean. The video maybe not so much.
one request: would you enable the video on the Zoom as well, so that way I could see you?
Yeah, sure. Here,
All right.
there you go.
Oh, perfect. All right, there we go. So in that case, let me just do one thing. Let's see, how do I do this? Participants, okay, side by side.
The recording has stopped.
Here we go. Okay. It's like announcing it. Okay, here we go. So I'm recording it side by side. So we're gonna have this beautiful side by side.
This meeting is being recorded.
Yes, thank you.
Nailed it
Automated
again.
Voice. There we go. All right, so yeah, I was very pleased to meet you. I think I reached out originally on the Reddit Socialism subreddit. I think could be that they told me about you, and then I looked at your subreddit and I thought, hey, I looked at some of your videos, talked with David Pacman, others, and I said, yeah, definitely would like to talk to this guy. He's well spoken. He is also, you seem very thoughtful. I did have one or two things I wanted to challenge you on, which I thought were, in keeping with the traditions of things like, for example, calling all right-wingers fascists, and
Right.
things like that. But by and large, I think it would be a very interesting conversation. And I wanted to focus on the areas where we disagree, because I feel there's so much that we would agree on that it would be more interesting to discuss things that might be, more, we're coming from different sides.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Hit me up. What do you have in your mind?
Well, let's start with that one thing. First of all, I'm just curious. So tell me about yourself. Where do you come from, on the political scale, I guess? What are your views, and why does that cause you to call half of all United States citizens fascists?
Well, I'm a libertarian socialist. I mean, but I don't think that my libertarian socialism informs the perspective that you're ascribing to me here. I think that if you understand how fascism typically works, if you understand the social trends that lead into that, you recognize that very often people feed into fascistic trends, or they push for things which are fascistic without themselves personally believing in it. So the 50% you're referring to, it's more, I guess, like 30% of the population is Republican. Sure. I don't think that all these people are like evil in their heart. I don't think that these people wake up every morning and think, What can I do to destabilize democracy in favor of an autocratic pseudo-populist state that favors, one ethnic group? I don't think they wake up like that. I think that, unfortunately, the way these things tend to play out is that there's a very small core group of people who do believe those things, and they're successful in using appeals to fear and insecurity to get other people on board with their prescriptions, if not their underlying ideas. So when it comes to the Trump presidency, I think Trump's a fascist. I 100% believe that. I don't know if he knows it, but he's anti-democratic, he's xenophobic, he's nationalistic, he's bigoted, he's anti-intellectual, he opposes the media, and he pushes, the big lie, this election lie scandal, the idea that like an outside group of leftists and Marxists and BLM perpetrators are conspiring with the Democratic Party to oust real Americans. These are basically identical to claims that other fascists have made before successful military coups. Maybe he'll never be successful, that would be lovely, but the underlying historical direction is really similar. And if you vote into that, and if you play into that, you are contributing to the growth of fascism. So it's not really a moral judgment,
I understand. I have a few things to say about that. I think it's very easy to sort of see things on the other side, let's say on the political right, whereas people on the right are also afraid. And I've done videos about this, nationalism versus socialism. I don't know if Trump's a fascist. I would say he's a nationalist. He himself goes out and says, I am a nationalist. I'm America first.
Mhm.
But I would say that, people on the right, just to channel their fears, they fear, people on the left. And very similar things can be said where also people on some of the things you've mentioned. You've mentioned that shadowy figures, billionaires perhaps on the left, like Soros, are trying to unseat people.
Right.
But we also have people on the left talking about the Koch brothers for years and talking about how they are trying to subvert American democracy the other way. So what I'm trying to say is there's fears to go around.
There is a difference between those two fears, right?
Well, tell me what the difference is.
Well, one of them is that the fears expressed by the left are honest and the ones expressed by the right are dishonest. Usually when people talk about the Koch brothers funding given political like missions, it's because they are, like factually, like you can literally see they funded this or that. But with the George Soros thing, they will ascribe anything and everything to George Soros if they can. Like they'll say, this Soros funding BLM protest or whatever, this sort of thing, Everyone's afraid, that's true, but the legitimacy of these fears matters because, German citizens in 1932 were afraid of Jewish Bolshevik influence on their country, The existence of fear isn't a legitimate excuse to then slip into, like, negative political trends.
Oh, on that we totally agree. I think the fear is crippling and it enables a lot of bad things to happen. Let me kind of backtrack. So you're saying that they're true on one hand, they're honest, on the other hand, they're not. Look, I called into the Tom Hartman show years ago, right? And he is very notably against libertarians, even though I'm a left libertarian, but it's not nuanced many times with progressive hosts. I like Tom Hartman, and and if you call it to Sam Cedar, he is like well known for bashing libertarians. They have a lot of fun over there with that. My point is this: that with Tom Hartman, I was talking about libertarianism, and his talking point is always like this. He always goes to, in 1985, the platform of libertarians was this, and the Koch brothers were funding this. And it's like the entire thing, and I tell him before that there was Milton Friedman, and before that there were socialist libertarians in the 19th century, and so on and so forth. There's John Stuart Mill. But like, to him, the Koch brothers are the inventors of the American libertarianism, never mind anyone who came before, Mises, Say, and even someone like Milton Friedman. That's what I'm trying to say. It's not accurate either. I don't think it's accurate to be afraid of the Koch brothers enabling right-wing things any more than it is of George Soros enabling.
Well, I don't have a problem with people being afraid of things that are legitimate and actually happening. If there are political causes that George Soros is funding, which he does fund some, not all the ones the right, yeah. But if the right has a problem with that, I don't have a problem with the right saying, I don't like George Soros funding this left-wing thing, if George Soros is indeed funding this left-wing thing. It's the broader conspiracism surrounding it. And, there are wealthy people on both sides of the political aisle who fund political projects that they agree with, It's not as though this is like a partisan issue. Of course, wealth flows on both sides. The issue is that one side has turned this into an existential conspiracy. It's not just Soros with the right either. The broader narrative is that the Democratic Party is aligned with like foreign enemies, Marxists, anti-white racists, BLM advocates, and like neo-Soviets to destroy America. And this is an unsubstantiable and entirely conspiratorial claim. We have QAnon followers in Congress at the moment, and that's like such a far cry beyond anything you see on the left, right? If there were signs that the Democratic Party was enabling the type of behavior that leads to fascism, then I would criticize it for that too. I just don't see it happening. Biden is like the opposite of a fascist. He's this dawdling, passive appeal to bipartisanship, never speak a mean word about anything, like neolib. He's very, very much establishment, very, very much like rooted in the status quo.
I have to say, I think that's what America wanted, or at least by and large, whoever voted came out to vote. But look, there's a big progressive wing. I've seen the Republican Party change every few years with the Tea Party and then the alt-right. And now you're talking about QAnon, which is like way out there. And obviously, I'm not saying anything. QAnon is not true at all, but most.
Not yet.
Not yet. So you think the red shoes are making a comeback?
Maybe one day. We were just actually watching a Marjorie Taylor Greene press conference earlier today. It is incredible how removed from reality some of these people are. People with real power, too. I mean, far more power than what I or most people would ever have. It's kind of terrifying.
Well, yeah. And look, I think it's easy to look at the other side and see that all the time. Just watch right-wing news. You'll see it on this side where they constantly point out things which I consider to be mundane, but they're afraid of. Essentially, they're afraid of creeping socialism. Okay, and we talk about that, and then communism. Let me just say a few things. Okay,
but those claims aren't as defensible as the claims that people make about the right. I mean, you can say the left and the right both claim the other side is bad, and I agree with that. But you can't say that just because they both think the other is bad, that their claims about the other are equally legitimate. Like there's a.
So let's take a deep dive into sort of the crimes of the left. And again, as a left libertarian, I like ideas of decentralizing power. And there was a big tradition in Russia, for example, starting, let's say, with the rise of the USSR. There was Kropotkin and Bakunin and others talking about collectivism, but voluntary collectives, okay, and anarchy. They were socialist anarchists. And what I want to ask about is like some facts. Like, is it not true that in the Russian Revolution, right, let's say the original Russian Revolution was deposing the Tsar, and Kerensky kind of put an interim government in there, and it was pretty good. Nobody died so much. But then the Bolsheviks came in and they staged a coup. Lenin, came from Germany. They basically took over. And then there was an entire civil war in which more people died than in the entire World War I on the Russian side. 20 million people died in a bloody civil war. Brothers were killing brothers and so on. What exactly was the point of that? And then Lenin brought back the NEP later, which was essentially a return to private ownership and private property. So what was I'm saying revolutions like the French Revolution also lead to bloody counter-revolutions and so on. But at the end of the day, isn't that worse? Isn't that much worse? Isn't the track record? I can go on. I could go later to the Stalin era, and I could go to collectivized farming and so on, and the Holodomor and other things, and in China with Mao. But just to stop there, don't you think there is a bloody record on the left as well?
So I think, a couple of things. I'm not a big fan of the Soviet Union, so they're not usually like a group that I come out to defend. But I think it's incredibly reductive to try to frame the right and the left as having comparable degrees of like threat to the world based on like some loose ascription to maybe there was 100 years ago a revolution and they were on the left. Like when the conditions behind the Russian Revolution have nothing to do with modern America. They're completely and utterly divorced from each other. There is no parallel, no precedent, nothing. There is no Red Army brewing in the peasantry to do this or to that. Whereas some historical comparisons feel more apt, with regards to the fascism thing. what's happening right now in America with the Republican Party is eerily similar to a lot of the far-right populist movements that you saw in 1920s Germany, early 1930s Germany. It's not about like who's killed more people, the left or the right. I genuinely don't know what the answer is, and you'd have to determine what the left and the right divide is, and then you'd also have to determine how you proportion it based on per capita, or maybe you could argue that fascist societies are so unstable they don't get a chance to kill as many people, because if they lasted longer they would have killed 10 times as many, whereas the Soviet Union lasted much longer than like the Nazi Germany, like stuff like that. I don't really know. Like, I don't know how to do that math.
Yeah, I don't want to get into that. And sorry to cut you off.
No,
Go
I
ahead.
just want to say all I know is that you have to take a look at what's happening now, what policies, what actions, what rhetoric leads to what outcomes, more so than like who's more dangerous, the right or the left, you know?
So let's go with that. Are you saying seriously what's happening now will lead to the same kind of bloody killing of innocents in the United States that we saw in Nazi Germany, or that we saw with, let's say, Imperial Japan invading China? Are you really saying that Trump's sentiments are going to lead to marauding white nationalist armies coming down and literally like lynching Negroes? I don't know. Is that what you're saying will happen?
That could 100% happen, yeah. It wouldn't happen immediately or tomorrow, but yeah. I mean, again, I saw this happen in Nazi Germany. It wasn't like you snap your fingers and all these outcomes take place. It's that you slowly see rights restricted. Keep in mind that a General Attorney Barr was looking at sedition charges for Black Lives Matter protesters towards the end of Trump's first term. If Trump had had a second term there, it's entirely possible that protesting itself would have been something that the State Department but the Justice Department looked to prosecute. So you start to get more and more removal of your rights. Donald Trump made many attacks against the media, saying that he was willing to take away press passes from journalists who gave him a hard time. He pushed the 1776 Commission with the goal of pushing patriotic education, essentially removing historical textbooks which describe the true history of slavery and racism, and replacing them with like hyper-nationalistic, hyper-patriotic textbooks that are basically just about extolling.
There are parallels on every side of the left trying to go into the schools and change textbooks or ban certain books.
No, this isn't there's no parallel. There is no Democratic president right now trying to convince people that the school system is anti-American and that the way to fix that is to rewrite all the textbooks into being like inaccurate and hyper like nationalistic.
No, but if you just replace anti-American with racist, there is a huge movement on the left saying that we have racist also history and we need to actually rewrite all the books in order to not and take down the statues. And
that's happening in academia, though, not from our president. Biden hasn't said anything about that. Academics want to rewrite our textbooks because our textbooks are terrible. Most of them are written by like Pearson in Texas, and they're designed and approved by conservatives.
I'm not saying it's good or bad. All I'm trying to say is,
but that's
okay, maybe that one guy isn't doing it. Okay.
But there's
what I'm saying is
difference.
Many people who are on the left together are doing it.
No. But there's a huge difference between the president saying that in order to protect this country, we have to change our education to make it more nationalistic, and academics saying, hey, our current textbooks are inaccurate.
The president, Biden, would say that we need critical race theory, for example, in order to make the country less racist. Sorry?
He hasn't said any such thing. Biden has never said we need to have critical race theory in our like high school textbooks. He's never said that.
I'm not sure if he said that we need it in the textbooks, but I think he has endorsed having critical race theory.
Critical race theory isn't taught at a high school level.
Sensitivity training. I mean, there's a lot of things, and there's theory.
Sensitivity training for what? Federal employees? That's a pretty big difference.
That's fine. I'm saying that's fine.
No, I'm just saying there's a big difference between like it's not fine because you're like conflating a lot of stuff. There's a huge difference between the president of the United States, for political reasons, changing textbooks to indoctrinate children, and like the president being okay with sensitivity training to federal employees, or academics changing textbooks to make them more accurate. But critical race theory isn't taught in high school. Critical race theory is a graduate level, or at the very least like a collegiate level academic theory.
Well,
like
I'm going to say this. If I go through the right-wing news, what I like is I look at left-wing news and I look at right-wing news, because I find that these echo chambers are terrible. I want to get into that next, but I think the internet has shaped a lot of what we do and how we think, and that's why we're so polarized. But I'm a big fan of looking at biased things on the left and biased things on the right, because they do the best job of trying to unearth the other side doing these bad things. And of course, it's a one-sided system. I'm going to have Noam Chomsky on next week. I'm talking to him about capitalism and free speech.
Tell him
we're friends. I definitely will. Was he on your show?
I hope he is on my show sometime before he dies. That'd be nice.
All right. Yeah, we're friends for many years since I visited him at MIT. I also visited Tim Berners-Lee. They were in the same building. He's in Arizona now. But there's a reason. And so what I really want to get into is capitalism and how it shapes society. And one of the ways it shapes society is very organically. You'll find what I'm saying is rooted completely in fact. So, like, for example, the news media is subject to market competition, and it has to pay the journalists. Therefore, it has to make a profit. At least the for-profit news media does, as opposed to, say, Wikipedia or something that has no profit motive. And so, because journalism was so disrupted by the internet, right, they had to adapt. And one way to adapt is have ads, right? But also they needed to run one-sided stories. They needed to lock in and be sensational and lock in their audience, whether it's Fox News on the right or whether it's, let's say, Daily Kos on the left or whatever it is. What happens is if you run a story that covers both sides or explains why Trump did what he did or whatever, or investigates like equally, people will say, oh, that's not sensational. I see what happened there. And then your story doesn't get reshared. So capitalism actually selects for stories that are super biased. And then Facebook and big tech need to make quarterly profits too. So they basically have algorithms that prioritize the things that you, quote, engage with. And the things that you engage with tend to be outrage. Look what the other side did today. Be outraged. And by the way, click on these ads on the right. You might buy something. So like the thing is, like, capitalism as a system is gradually selecting for biased, one-sided stories on the one hand, and permit me to say, channels on YouTube and other things, of course, thrive as well if they don't suddenly sell out or defect and admit that the other side may also be pretty okay and humans, and they also have fears. Yeah. What I'm trying to say is capitalism selects that we go into these two camps, and then the social networks have to put us into echo chambers because we get the most engagement, the most clicks by responding and commenting about someone was wrong on the internet. So that's why our society is the way it is, in my opinion. And I'd rather see the big tech have open source alternatives like Wikipedia with no profit motive.
Yeah,
so
of course.
What do you think of that, by the way?
I think the fragmentation of available information is a huge, huge problem, and it's going to destroy this country. It's also targeted ad reads. We live in different realities. It used to be, as many problems as this country had, we were all getting our information from basically the same source. We got it from radio or from one of a limited number of television channels. But nowadays, people get their information from such a wide variety of sources that you can have people who occupy entirely different realities. The contention that I would make, though, is that people on the left generally occupy the reality that actually exists, and people on the right generally don't. I think even Obama said that recently, that like Republicans, or I don't know if he said Fox News viewers, or if he said Republicans or conservatives, or something along those lines. He said that they just live in an entirely different reality. There's like a whole other set of beliefs they have about the world that just do not conform to what we can test or measure empirically. And that's one of the issues that I have. I do agree that it's a fundamental problem, like on all sides, but I reject the idea that that there's any comparison to be made between the disinfo on the right and the left, you know?
I mean, I've done videos of literally like the word nationalism versus the word socialism and how it energizes people. Like on the right, a lot of people who are nationalists, they're talking about the globalists and the agendas that they have essentially in Davos. You know,
but they even defend, what does a globalist even mean to a Republican?
A globalist is someone who goes to Davos, right, and participates in the World Economic Forum, for example, and talks about how we're going to have multinational corporations, how there's going to be free trade between all the countries. And maybe the left, in some way, Bernie would actually agree with Trump in this, with protection.
I mean, it's a global economy either way, right? I think the term globalist means like some people use it correctly. It just means you participate in like a global economy, which we all do. If you didn't do that, our country would fall apart. But some people mean it as this weird like dog whistle for like a anti-American, like like Hillary Clinton, lizard people, that kind of stuff. It's just
Don't forget the lizard people, but like you get someone like Nigel Farage trying for years, right? He's the head of the UKIP party, try to get Britain out of Europe. Why? Because the EU, he says, is a federation that's heavy-handed, doesn't care about the people in Britain, doesn't care about the people in anywhere really in their member countries, and is out of touch. And he wants Britain out. So that's a nationalist. I'm not necessarily, I can sympathize with people saying that the federation is out of touch with the local. I think it could lead to instability. And obviously, I think that free trade it could have many positive things for consumers, not necessarily producers, but consumers. And I think that, in fact, in the Republican Party itself, there's complete shifts every few years. So like Reagan was super for free trade, and he said that nationalism is actually a cheap form of patriotism, and he didn't like it. And then someone like Donald Trump is a protectionist and is completely the opposite of Reagan, and yet the Republicans venerate both people. So I'm not looking for logic here. I'm simply saying that you could see how people might be for protectionism or for free trade, and how they might say that their jobs as producers of labor are being taken away, even at the same time as consumers are getting cheap stuff, but as producers, they are being disrupted by free trade.
Yeah,
So
there are arguments to that. I don't know if the protectionist arguments sell really well, like in our modern economy. Trump marketed himself as a protectionist, but he didn't really do anything. He had a couple tariffs with China, and he promised to get some jobs back for the American like steel and auto manufacturers. And then I think a few thousand jobs came back, and then we lost millions of jobs because of his mishandling of COVID. So I don't know how much it really panned out positively. It seems like with our economy, the best route forward is to abandon this, because some people think like immigration depresses local wages. It doesn't. It actually increases them for almost everyone. Some people say that like participation in the global economy, like it hurts our jobs. It doesn't seem to. What it does is it changes the types of jobs that we have to do. And the problem is we're facing the fact of the matter is that this country is so wealthy and so well educated that it's not efficient for us to be the ones to be producing the cars anymore. It's just not. We could, and everyone could pay 3 times as much for a car if they like really, really wanted to. I think the best solution to this would be, well, I guess what they would call socialism, a strong welfare state. Say you're like a 60-year-old factory union worker and there's no more work for you. That's terrible. I don't think that you can just learn to code. I don't think that you can just move to Seattle and become like a coffee shop bistro entrepreneur, some dumb shit like that. I think that we should, with the state, should look to these people and say, you gave your life making this country better. The economy changed. That's not your fault. That's nobody's fault. But you deserve to live a dignified life. And then they can live off a wage for the rest of their lives. We could easily afford that for the entirety of the steel and auto manufacturing unions that used to exist in this country. We just don't do it. We bait them around with little carrots on a stick saying, oh, if you vote for this person or that person, your jobs will come back. They're never going to come back. We lie to them, and eventually they're going to die in some poverty-stricken Rust Belt town, having spent the past 30 years voting for candidates that all promised they would bring the jobs back.
Well, on this we agree. I think we agree on the problems, and this is, I think, where it's really interesting to discuss whether the solutions are libertarian socialists, which I think you are, but at the same time, what you've just described is just social democracy, in my opinion. I mean, yeah, maybe someone in Fox News would call it socialism, but it's really social democracy, isn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's 100% compatible with like the general route that we should take forward as well. I don't think there's any excuse for not having a good social welfare state in this country.
What do you think of someone like Andrew Yang talking about a UBI for everybody?
I like that Andrew Yang normalized conversations about a UBI, but there are so many other policy positions he has that I really don't like. It seems like he likes UBI as a way of addressing some kind of techno automation apocalypse, but I don't know if he's behind the broader package for social democracy. Like the stuff he advocates for, it doesn't give me the impression he wants like a generalist approach towards making people's lives more baseline decent. It's just about that one UBI approach. But
I
if it
hear
gets
you.
people talking, then hey, that's great.
I hear you. Look, I am for helping people. I mean, I've devoted a lot of my life to building these things with technology. In a way, I'm a techno libertarian because I think that I don't need to fight for libertarianism or bitch about how the current system is because technology kind of decentralizes power for me. Just to give you a myriad examples, just to give you a few, the computers that we're using right now are personal computers. Somebody had to create them, but then once they were created, suddenly general purpose computers could be used for anything. The pipes we use right now used to cost $3 a minute to have long distance calls. I think I was when I was a kid, it was $3. Well, now we have voice over IP. What happened? What happened is the telecoms were taken out of the monopoly equation, and telephone systems were considered the quintessential natural monopoly. Milton Friedman gave that as an example of a natural monopoly. We put the lines in. Well, then we got packet switching. Packets can travel throughout these lines, and all of a sudden these are dumb pipes. So voice over IP just drove the price to zero. We've got desktop printers. You can print anything you want. In the past, you needed to go to gatekeepers. We got the web, where before you needed to go to radio stations, gatekeepers and cable channels or newspapers, whatever. It also reduced geographic boundaries. So anyone in Texas can just put up some code, and all of a sudden someone else can consume it. So the same thing is now happening with banks, with DeFi and all this stuff, with smart contracts. But all I'm trying to say is technology is constantly putting the power in the hands of the people. So I'm not a libertarian who bitches about, oh, look at the government, oh, look who's doing this stuff, because technology is constantly empowering people to do what they previously needed gatekeepers and big corporations, institutions, colleges, big states do.
There are
No
definitely elements of that. There are also elements in which technology can make the system like impossibly strong too, you know? The fact that the government can read all of our data means they have pretty much unlimited power when it comes to understanding what we are and what we do. And the fact that people now wake up, live, and then fall asleep looking at a screen every day, it means that advertisers and corporations have unprecedented control over our buying habits. Now it seems like in the past, our buying habits were like heavily dictated by local trends, markets, and sales, people we knew and business owners that we liked. And nowadays, like we all march to the tune of an international conglomerate that dictates our interests, you know? So I feel like technology, I don't know, it feels like a fairly neutral tool to me. There are also like big issues, like I said, with where you get your news from, right? You know? If the news if the only news channel, if there's only one news channel, that means there's really only one narrative that people can get. It's probably going to be a very milquetoast, like sort of centrist narrative to appeal to the greatest number of people possible. That's not like great for radical leftist groups like the ones that I want to see flourish, but it also keeps things relatively stable. But nowadays, like if you're like a young kid and you're like sexually frustrated and you think like, yeah, dude, women are all dumb bitches, they should just get raped, whatever. You can go online and find forums where people will agree with you. You can go online and find multimillionaires selling you political ideologies that conform to your biases. And now you don't have to go outside anymore. You have you have an entire network to back up the thing that in another society you may have grown out of, you know? It's really dangerous stuff. We're so past the cutting edge right now. Human society was not meant to handle, like, our brains were not biologically designed to handle all the stuff that we contend with now, and that's really cool, but it's also really, really scary. So I don't know what the best way forward is.
Yeah, these online communities, they're geographically distributed, and obviously you can find like-minded people everywhere. I mean, I deal with this every day. A lot of these things need to be enabled. But look, a lot of the times, the platforms that we use today they go through stages, okay? So there's like Web 1.0. Web 1.0, like I said, disrupted publishing, which is to say you have a message to get out there, you can get it out there now. You have a blog, you can have your own show. In the past, you can have your own show, Vaush. You would have to, go get a channel to run you. There's only a few of them, and, maybe go in some local area. Now you can be all over the world with as many followers as you want. So, at the same point, you're saying you can have all these things. So technology enables you to have that. But Web 2.0 was about your followers then, or your fans talking to each other, right? So you would get like Vaush fans dating each other, right? Or like going to California and meet other Vaush.
Web 2.0 was all about integrating different elements of the web. turning it into a multi-connected or modular network, right? As I
Yeah,
understand it, I'm not a tech guy. As I understand it, because I remember back when I was a kid, like if you had an interest, you would go find some tiny fan forum, and that would be your interest.
what
Like that's it. There'd be 200 people there, maybe.
IRC?
Yeah, IRC, and the mod would be like this cool, like mysterious dude, and he's probably just some college student. Nowadays, everything's centralized. MySpace, Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, and everyone follows the same groups and the same things. And our experiences have become normalized, standardized, which isn't always a bad thing. I mean, it can be nice being able to share your interests with a broader number of people. The communities that I'm a part of, politically speaking, or even like hobby wise, like games, like video games, I'm glad that there are millions of people talking about that stuff. I think that's awesome. So it just
Yeah,
it feels
well,
like there are so many trade-offs.
there are trade-offs. That's my whole point, is that, you're building this technology. It's going to be used for good. It's going to be used for bad, but it definitely enables people to create these interest groups. But something happened along the way with Web 2.0. Like I said, when Web 1.0 has a very robust open source ecosystem, like WordPress powers 40% of all websites in the world. Okay, 40%. They're up to 40% now, and it means that anytime somebody opens a website, 4 out of 10 times they're going to install WordPress or use the one-click install on some hosting company, and then boom, they have a blog, right? So if we define Web 1.0 as one unidirectional publishing, right? Like you come up with the content, you distribute it, right? You do the whole thing, including YouTube. Then that's Web 1.0. Web 2.0 would be like the YouTube comments section if it turned into a community of people who independently of you, right, got together, maybe somewhere in Kansas, created a chapter and then got together and did something, right? So somewhere along the way, Web 2.0 did not have a viable open source alternative. That's why I started building one 10 years ago. So the open source alternatives, when they don't exist, you get this weird thing where it goes bigger and bigger and bigger. Facebook starts in Harvard, then it goes all over the world. And then before you know it, we're having our public forums and discussions and democracy in privately owned platforms. And when they say, I built it, I own it, I agree. Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg built it, he owns it. And if his shareholders every year try to vote him out, it's a futile gesture because he has all the voting shares. This is what capitalism actually is: one share, one vote. In socialism, it's more like one person, one vote. So each person has an equal amount of, I think they used to say even the janitor had an equal amount of voting power to like a professor, something like that in the university.
A worker cooperative should definitely be structured in a way that doesn't allow one person to consolidate all the political decision making, right? I mean, depending on how things are structured, I don't know if like the janitors would be weighing in on the teaching curriculum and the teachers would be weighing in on the shit mopping up in the bathroom curriculum. But yeah, I generally feel like that's preferable because you can decentralize as much as you want, but as long as it's possible for people with money and influence to re-centralize it, then you're going to run into the same problem again 5 or 10 years down the line. I don't know if technology necessarily like liberates people beyond its capacity to automate tedious labor, because that gives humans more free time. But beyond that, it seems like almost anything technology can use to better the human experience can be used with equal power to do the opposite.
Well, I'm not. So I don't want to get into that rabbit hole because yes, terrorists.
It's also a very abstract question.
Yeah, I mean, terrorist groups can go use, secure Telegram channels and try to organize something. So that's definitely true. But I think what I'm talking about is the technology that we use is currently privately owned. So Facebook is privately owned. Mm-hmm. Amazon is privately owned. Twitter is privately owned. I think you can almost not name any big tech company except maybe Wikipedia, which is like number 7 in the Internet Wikimedia Foundation. You can't really name a lot of these things that are nonprofit because it became so lucrative. You can just, once you have the software, you can just copy. Everybody has it. And that's good for the world. Definitely the zero margin cost is good for the marginal cost to copy. But what we have is people extract that. They're very extractive. They create a data center. All the data has to go through them. They put the ads, they make money off the ads. And they don't give a thought to like, how do we give away this back-end software? So because of that, I feel like right now, as we're talking, the other day, there were bills in the US Congress to break up big tech, right? And this is where we run into these big things where huge corporations versus huge states, right, fight. And what I'm saying is, like, as a libertarian, I would like instead to peacefully have everyone have a UBI, have free time, go on GitHub and contribute to open source projects because they're cool, not because they have to survive and feed their family, but because they want to create good software. And once they create that good software, then everybody gets off of the proprietary private platforms and moves to the open source open platforms. But that hasn't happened for some reason in the Web 2.0 space.
I couldn't really say. I don't know enough about any of this to really meaningfully comment on it. All I know is that the consolidation of power behind big tech is definitely an issue, but I don't know how you could really address it without just setting the same cycle in line again. The problem is, I don't think your average consumer gives a fuck whether or not, like, web stuff is open source. In fact, I know for a fact they don't. Most people don't care about this. They just care about whichever systems are most convenient for them. The most convenient systems are always going to be the ones that are the most centralized because they can do the most with the smallest possible number of logins and page switches, you know? I feel like if there was one website and it was like Twitter, Reddit, YouTube, Amazon, Facebook all wrapped up into one, and it was controlled by a single person with almost complete control over all the data that goes through it, most people would rate it more positively than any previous combination of websites. Everyone would use that website and people would complain if it got broken up. This is just one of those situations. It's the same with privacy too, right? People will sell their privacy for nothing. If the government had a program where it was like, we'll give you a $10 tax credit every year if you let us read all your data, most people would take that deal. They care about the $10 more. But the abstract concept of privacy is unbelievably important because of all the political implications that it has down the line. So it seems like this is one of those things where there's not really a consumer demand for the types of systems that maximize human freedom.
Well, it seems like that. It does seem like that on the surface, but I'm about to show you how it already happened and how it went the other way. But what you're saying is exactly what many libertarians say. You know, most libertarians in the US are right-wing libertarians, and they say the state is exactly that. People are lazy. They don't want to do their own personal responsibility, secure their own, you know, interests and security. So they get turn to the state, and the state offers all this, just like a centralized YouTube, Reddit website. It does everything for you, right? It cleans out your garbage. It does this, it does that. It protects your children, sticks them in a public school, medicates them with amphetamines if they don't, they run around too much. And you can go work for the giant corporations, you know? So the libertarians would say the same thing you're saying, but let me give you an example of where it went the other way, okay? 20 years ago, most of the United States was on America Online. Whoever was online was either America Online, CompuServe. You remember this? I don't know if there was a time period about 20 years ago. America Online, CompuServe, Microsoft Network, Prodigy, I don't know. These services were exactly what you're talking about. America Online had, you've got mail. So you had email, chats, everything in one place. Keyword IBM, keyword your company. You had to pay, and there was one guy at the top. His name was Steve Case. He was from Hawaii, okay? America Online, you had to pay for it. Then as the years went by, America Online gave out 100 free hours, then 200, then 500, then 1,000, and 20,000. Why was America Online suddenly being so generous and sending all these CDs with free hours? Because in that span of time, there was a little thing called the web, the open web. So these web browsers, which are totally free, people started downloading them. And using an open protocol called HTTP, right? Anyone could put up a server at IBM.com and not have to pay for keyword IBM, AOL, keyword IBM. And all of a sudden, maybe not the people, but all of the organizations just got off of AOL. And you can't compete with open. Like AOL can be free, and still people would like to own their own data, their own database, their own e-commerce. Like, could you build Facebook on top of AOL? No way. AOL would never allow Facebook to create a social network on top of AOL. Could you build Amazon, a store? No. So having a permissionless open web that was not controlled by anybody, no private property, no privately owned platform, was the only way we actually got e-commerce. We got software as a service, and trillions of dollars were unlocked in like business models that AOL would have never really thought of, or even if they thought of, they would have extracted all the rents from it. So that's an example. That's something that really happened. Instead of Mark Zuckerberg, we had Steve Case. Instead of Facebook, we had AOL. It's gone. It's totally gone because the open web killed it. That's my thesis anyway.
I couldn't really speak to it. We are very well out of any range of understanding I have of this stuff. I don't know much about like the early tech development or anything like that. I know about the political and sociological ramifications of the internet as it is now. At least I'd like to believe that I know about those things. I don't really know about the history of the web as it is to this point.
Well, here's what I'm going to say about today. We have government and we trust it to do the trust busting, okay? We trust the government to wipe our ass and do all these things. But government, and I say this as a libertarian, government is the tool of the capitalist. Okay, many people think that it's a tool, is too much on the side of the worker, the socialist, the too many regulations. Just last year, the Fed injected money into the markets, trillions of dollars into corporations. It was not in their mandate. They exceeded their mandate. Weren't supposed to do that, but they needed to save the markets, the stock markets. Why? Because that's what we all look to. People were out of work.
Well, they did that because they needed to provide liquid currency to those firms. It wasn't like a loan; it was just a transfer of wealth. The corporations had bonds in the United States government. It wasn't actually money being given to them. It was just the more federal currency being printed to allow for a more liquid transfer of wealth. The banks needed to give people money because a bunch of people were withdrawing money, that kind of stuff,
The banks needed to give people money, and not many people know this, but the Fed usually has Federal Reserve requirements. You need to, keep 10% of your bank money, base money, with the Fed on reserve. They eliminated them. There are no reserve requirements. They were called ample reserves scenario, where they basically said, lend as much as you want right now. You're fine. And it was a very interesting thing. So yes, our money, the money that we use today in everyday life, is created by privately owned, publicly traded banks. So an underwriter in a bank decides which business will, winners and losers, essentially. They look at a business, they say, you look like you're a business that could return the money over the next 20 years, 10 years. Here's a loan. You don't. So maybe you get a higher interest rate or go away. So the money that and consumer credit is similar. So, they give you a credit card, you go to the store, you buy your food. So that's where most of our money comes from. 95% of our money supply is that, essentially.
Well, right, sure. So the only thing I'm going to say here is that it's not the government deciding which businesses are going to float and which ones are going to sink. It's just that there are... Which banks?
No, I'm saying the banks decide.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, the banks have a variety of systems to determine who they're willing to loan to that are affected by class and race and a bunch of other things. I'm just saying that with regards to the Fed, like a lot of people say it was the Fed just giving money to businesses, when in reality it was just liquidating an existing currency that was held in bonds. And likewise, like with the big bailouts that were done during the beginning of the Obama administration, those were paid back with interest. I think a lot of people assign a lot of conspiratorial intent to the Fed when I don't necessarily know if there is any. I feel like the Fed, for the most part, does its job pretty well, Like, it does a pretty decent job of keeping, like, interest rates so low, people can borrow if they want to. Inflation, 2 to 3%. I mean, generally, I feel like the Fed's been doing okay for the past 20 or so years.
No, I think the Fed is doing a good job. I think that Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook is doing a good job. I don't think that you can be all things to all people, but they're certainly very, very centralized. And the difference between someone who, say, is a socialist, or even a tanky who goes, or whatever you want, man, just centralize everything. I think that you should always look at trying to create an open source voluntarist alternative to whatever the thing is that, is centralizing all the power. So with Facebook, I'd like to see an open source Facebook. Somehow with Web 3.0, which is to say the web of value transfer, so Bitcoin, Ethereum, smart contracts, it is radically open source. And I think it's that way because the blockchains are open and all the computers have to run the same code. So they had to make everything open source. Everything in decentralized finance, which is a huge and growing sector of the economy now, Uniswap, which is a decentralized exchange, Aave, which is a lending platform, eliminates middlemen. There's no banks. On Aave, you can just source loans, and it all gets
So
paid back.
wait, I have to ask on this. Okay. What
Yeah.
what would the consumer incentive be to use a decentralized Facebook? So the reason why people use Facebook is because everybody else uses Facebook. It's used because everyone's friends and family and businesses and everything is on there. The point of social media is that these systems become more desirable the more people are on them. So what would like give me an example. Like what would a decentralized system like this be? What would it look like? Like people create it, sure, but we already have across the internet probably dozens or hundreds of social media adjacent platforms that are decentralized and are open source. And it seems like people don't flock to them. There's always going to be more money, always going to be more advertising, always going to be more features behind centralized profiteering social media platforms. You know, how do you compete with that?
Oh, it's an amazing question. How much time do you have? Here, can I share my screen just real quick?
Oh yes, you can.
All right. So let me know if it shows up on your side over there.
Yes, I see.
Okay, so I have two companies, Intercoin and Cubix. So Cubix is the older company, and I have very many videos on YouTube about Cubix platform and how and why people would prefer a shall we say decentralized social network. So here's the basics, the broad strokes. When you want to have your own community, what do you want? You want to be able to be in control. You want to have your own brand, your own relationships, right? Here, you know what? I'll play this video. It's about.
Wait, hold on. I have to be perfectly clear. I want an answer to the question, not a full plug for the organization that you run.
Forget that. Okay. I don't want a full plug, but how do I explain it without a video?
I need to know because with
okay.
It seems like market trends with this sort of thing do consolidate towards centralization. I'm interested in the alternative, but
right.
in a generalized sense. You know?
Okay, so let's start with the broad strokes. Here we have a web browser. The web browser is your common piece of software that is able to load any website, correct? It gives you the ability to have bold text, images, but it's also able to have you, have video conferencing, have payments. So that's what I build. That's what people build. So essentially, if you want to have video conferencing like we're having now, you could go on Zoom and you could have a network effect of Zoom, or you could go on something like the Andrew Yang website that we built 2 years ago. And then I just want to click a button that says video conferencing, just to show you what it looks like. So here's a conversation, and here's a video conferencing thing. Boom, there it is. So basically, this is running in a browser. It's a common piece of software that's essentially it's not controlled by any specific company. I'm on a website, right? And everything about this is in their database. It's not on Facebook. So I would say the first incentive, the huge incentive, is for the organization, the community leaders, whether it's the Harvard Alumni Association or whether it's a cruise ship that's disconnected from the internet when they're sailing. They want to have their own network that's not relying on anything else. That's why AOL disappeared from, the web took over. No, but you're not asking about them. You're asking why would a consumer want that?
Right, because you can have integrated chat and video share features and everything like site to site. But the reason why people gravitate towards, say, Discord or towards Skype or towards Facebook is because they're systems that everybody participates in. They exist for everybody.
So these systems, they exist for everybody. This payment here with Google Pay or Apple Pay, what happens is it's moved to the consumer's device. So it's an open standard. The website is able to call JavaScript functions, which invoke something like this payment
Right, but the average person doesn't care about any of this.
That's correct. But what happens is in the past, only Zoom had video conferencing and only PayPal had the payment processing. Okay, so you had to redirect to PayPal, a centralized company. Now, what happens is that with especially Bitcoin and Ethereum, this thing would be replaced with a QR code, and you literally have no third-party anything except the blockchain.
But why wouldn't
And
people just use the PayPal and the Zoom?
well,
Because the thing is, like, there are
go ahead.
benefits to this, like, abstractly for the people producing this stuff, but for a person just using products, nobody is going to want to, like, for every website they're a part of, have like an individual collection of systems and resources, passwords and login information that they want to coordinate to best use these systems. You know,
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So it takes about 10 seconds to go from here to there, but it takes a shift. Okay. Imagine this is a Facebook group, right? And this is running inside Facebook. So if I had gone to a different Facebook group, I would still be logged in as me, and all my friends would still be my friends, right? On the web, that's not the case. If I was to go to something else like NewYorkTimes.com, all of a sudden, I'm not logged in as me, and where are my friends? So every site is by itself. So there has to be a social layer to the internet, and there isn't, and to the web. But if there is a layer that basically lets you share your, I am this guy on this site, this guy on that site, and makes it all automated, then the entire web becomes just like one social network. In other words, from your perspective, it will be just as if you are on Facebook. You're still going to be logged in everywhere, and you're still going to be, do you know what I mean? Like
as a browser extension?
Yes, like a browser extension.
Well, I mean, if you can run that down, a browser extension, if it's like incorporated and used by everyone, wouldn't that just defer to the exact same centralization that any other website could? Updates would be done through. There are some Google web browser extensions that run advertisements. It just seems like you'd be deferring the power to like a different centralized structure, right?
Well, there's always something centralized. So, for example, we all run computers built by Apple or a small group of companies. Google builds the operating system Android. Apple builds the Apple OS. Google builds the Chrome browser. Apple builds Safari. So this is called a trusted computing base. It's very hard to replace that because Apple has patents, it has economies of scale up the wazoo. It has all these supply chains and everything else. So very hard for a startup to disrupt Apple. However, in the software world, once you resign to the fact that you're using Google's browser and you're using Apple's operating system, if you accept that, you can decentralize everything else. I'm not saying we can decentralize everything, including the operating system right now. But what I am saying is you can come to a website and you can see, hey, Greg, welcome to the New York Times. These are your friends. This is what they're reading. Like this could be hosted by your own server, and this enclosing website would not have to know what is in here to you.
So I understand the abstract benefits of this. I just wonder if there's if it's even possible to economically incentivize people to engage in this kind of behavior, Because the pitch that you're selling me on right now, I'm not a particularly tech literate person. I understand broadly the importance of decentralized power, but that puts me 16 steps ahead of your average person, right? Like your average person it will never care about anything other than immediate convenience, which existing corporations already gravitate towards to the greatest possible extent. So I don't know how you could improve on that.
So that's 100% true. And that's why there hasn't been an open source alternative. Like we felt it ourselves. It took us 10 years to replicate what Facebook has and make it convenient enough. And we're still not there. So, it's true that people are used to this shrink wrapped, here you go, thing. But as time goes on, the private enterprises that were privately funded give way to open source. And this is true with Linux powering all the servers. It's true with Wikipedia. So you could say the same thing. Britannica was a capitalist encyclopedia, right? It was sold door to door. People have giant bookshelves of Britannica from back then. Encarta was a Microsoft encyclopedia. And then came Wikipedia, totally open, and anybody can come and edit. Nobody owns the platform, and no one has a profit motive. And it just killed everything else. And you can see this all over the place. GitHub with Git. Basically, our web browsers themselves are built on open source technology.
Yeah, but Wikipedia is completely centralized, though. I mean, it may have editors who can come in and do whatever they want, but
It has no profit motive, though. You would agree.
Well, that's just because it's a nonprofit. I mean, that it could have so been the case that that would have panned out another way. I think the reason Wikipedia had to be a nonprofit is because there's not a strong incentive for people to pay for access to information. People don't really care about being educated. People do care, though, about the ability to like talk to their friends. That's something that measurably increases the quality of their life. So they're willing to put up with advertisements, you know?
They are. I'm just trying to say that there are always periods where the privately funded enterprises, they push the bleeding edge. They really do have the nicest, the slickest things, right? But over time, over the next 20, 30 years, the patents expire or whatever, and then it's replicated. And then for some reason, enough people come together, and this would happen a lot more often with the UBI, because people would have free time to do things like raise their own children or watch, take care of their elderly parents, or maybe contribute to science or open source software. So it doesn't happen nearly enough in our society because safety nets are shit for a lot of, well, they're not shit, actually. The United States has
pretty bad here compared to what we could be doing if we wanted to.
Yeah.
What are the positive social objectives that we're trying to achieve with this project? And like in the long term, like what are we
huge.
what's the goal of this?
Well, the goal of this is to basically decentralize what is now giant privately owned platforms that were financed by venture capitalists like Peter Thiel, who said competition is for losers, build a monopoly. And Mark Zuckerberg did. And that's essentially, now we're all looking at, just look at the news. Look at, what I'm going to be talking with Noam Chomsky about next week. It's basically that our society, as I said before, is shaped by the profit motive of these companies, and in very subtle ways. Take the example of you gave the example of phones lighting up, us constantly on their phones. My phone's been lighting up with these notifications all the time, right? This is a tragedy of the commons, but nobody says it quite that way. At least I haven't heard it. So the commons is human attention. Okay, it's a limited resource, but if Facebook doesn't grab your attention, then Twitter will. And then Twitter will become the number one thing on your phone. So they're actually forced to throw as many notifications, they call it engagement or eyeballs. They almost like, these are externalities to them. Human time that you spend with your children or people at dinner is an externality that can be raped by the business. Same way that they have non-biodegradable plastic bottles, which, by the way, Canada dry ginger ale, it's great. But see, non-biodegradable plastic. Why? Why has this not become biodegradable? Because they had glass bottles, and then they found out this was cheaper, and the fact that it flushes out into the ocean and becomes microplastics and gets into everyone's food, that's not their problem.
No, I recognize that. I'm just like, I'm not sure if I'm ever going to understand what the motivation will be to an average person to switch to any of these types of programs when there don't seem to be any ways that it actually improves their lives. It's more of like an abstract benefit to society, right? But if you tell an individual like, hey, you already are connected to everyone you know on like these 3 social media platforms. You're fed a constant drip feed of content. All of the celebrities and topics that you're interested in are already formatted into this. There's already like multi-layer integration that allows you to like link one thing to another thing and all that. And then like you would have all that, and then a person would be like, okay, well, there are benefits to decentralizing the web, using like browser-based currency and like login systems to use. And like, I get that. I just don't know how you would ever sell a person on that. I feel like if we're going to break up these big systems, it has to come through top-down regulation more so than anything else. I don't know if there's any way to like out-convenience these multi-billion-dollar companies that have teams of engineers designed to sacrifice everything for the sake of convenience, just so they can maximize their market share.
It could go either way, right? And this is the thing. You think it could go this way because you've seen it this way, and this is what you're biased to. I gave you an example where the web did it the other way, but it could go either way. Look,
we know where the web is right now. The web has never been this centralized before. This is as centralized as the web has ever been,
That's what I mean. So Web 1.0 has this great thing, WordPress, which I said is basically half the web is on it. So people are clearly choosing WordPress for a reason, right? They're not just saying, oh, well, let me go on medium.com. I have everything there, everything's hyperlinked. No, they feel that, hey, maybe I want to make my site red. Maybe I want to install analytics that I see, and maybe I want to install some new plugins that my friend built that is not on Medium because they can just kick me off. What about deplatforming? What about that? So
People
many
can
people.
make, with Squarespace, people can make their websites if they want to anyway. It's pretty easy to do that. But we're talking about social media. Social media isn't just about whether or not you can craft like unique web space. It's the ability to integrate your profile with as many other things and people as possible.
You think that Web 2.0 is about integration, and I'm saying that Web 2.0 is about communication. It's about letting people have what we're doing now: video conferencing, chats, events, coordinate their activities together, right? It's not something a blog will do. Like, you can have a Vaush blog, but your followers will not be able to like get together for dinner using your blog, right? They can with a Web 2.0 community site. So they can have a Facebook group, put an event, get together for dinner. So currently that's
They
only
can do that
possible
with,
on Facebook.
but the way social media exists right now maximizes the likelihood of being able to share that information, right? Having a Discord server or having like Twitter DMs or something, like the ability to access this. And if you want to, like, you can Google Calendar that, but I mean, Google's a centralized corporation. I don't,
And at least basically, look,
don't know
you're
how
right.
it goes.
But look, you're right. You may as well be talking to a guy who says, look, factory farms are just going to be cheaper than regular farms. So unless you have government regulation, the factory farms are going to outcompete, and billions of animals.
That's true. That's why I would advocate for government regulation there.
Yeah. No, so here's my point. In some things, we can't imagine how there can be an alternative to government regulation. With factory farms, you're right. I have a very hard time currently imagining how we can make factory farms less, basically nicer to animals. Okay. Again, capitalism forces them almost to cut corners, because if they don't, then the farm that does will outcompete them. Right. So if you're not the customer, you're the product. And if you're a cow or you're an inmate in a private jail, you're probably not getting the best service. Right. So
probably not. No, it's just like it's a little different too with commodities, because when it comes to, say, factory farming versus like artisanal, homegrown, well-treated cows, there's going to be a commodity benefit to paying more for more expensive meat. But in terms of like social media, nobody pays anything for social media, and the best platforms are going to be the ones with the most people on them, almost by default, because that means there's the greatest potential for activity on them,
Well,
it's
yeah,
not,
but
it's
if
not
that
really
was
a
true,
commodity to be sold.
if that was true, then Clubhouse and others would never take off, because there was a time when they were smaller than everything else. So why would anybody go try this new thing if it's small? I don't think that's necessarily true. One thing is that Facebook, for example, started in Harvard. Okay, MySpace existed, it was far bigger. Friendster existed, far bigger. But in Harvard, within that context, just there, Facebook was better.
But it's all centralized, though. I mean, they're all trying to put, even if they start smaller, the message they're hitting is eventually everyone will be on this app. That's what they all sell. Everyone uses Zoom. Everyone uses Twitter. Facebook, in the past, it was true with MySpace. That was always the selling point, that we will be able to connect with everyone here,
What I'm trying to do here is almost like when you try to deprogram conservatives, let's say, right? I'm trying to dismantle the assumptions that underlie this.
But my only assumptions here are to like the predominance of existing market trends, which seem to be like really, really strongly rooted right now in centralization. I'm not making any moral claims. I can understand there are benefits to decentralization. I just don't know. I guess it seems like it would always be like a marginal thing. Like some groups of people
not always
could
marginal, but it is a hard uphill battle. You're absolutely right. People are used to having
but a hard uphill battle for what?
Now. In 2000,
what are people fighting for? Like for their personal
the uphill battle, to be honest, yeah, personal convenience. But like the uphill battle is that in 2004, you can compete easily with Facebook, because Facebook launched having like profiles. Like if you just had open source profiles, you would beat Facebook, but nobody did. And then you essentially had, Facebook had the wall, which is the feed or whatever. And then it had this and that and the photos and the tagging in it. By now, everyone's used to all of it. So if you were missing some of it, you're not as good, right? So that's the uphill battle. Like Bitcoin solved.
But what are you fighting towards, though? Like what? Like if you're convincing people, like you should
Oh,
no longer use these centralized social media platforms. You should instead push towards this. And right
no,
now,
no,
this will allow you fewer connections, fewer services, fewer activities, fewer people using it. But in the future, we'll have
no,
what?
no. We're never telling people do not use Facebook. That's the whole point. We're telling them, we're not coming to them. We're coming to NYU, where I went, any school, alumni association, and saying, hey, how do you like having to constantly call people and ask for donations? How many alumni you have? 600,000 people that are still alive that went through your school? Yeah. How's that going for you? Are you using email, Facebook? Are you being drowned out in a sea of noise that they don't care about you? And they're like, yeah, that's true. So what do you have? They're like, what's this? Very simple solution. Give them your own app, the NYU alumni app. And then your alumni, they go to a new town, California, they meet other NYU alumni. They date, they can connect over common interests. And you can go and negotiate like group discounts at local restaurants for them. This is an example. Guess what? Suddenly, instead of people feeling like NYU is begging them, hey, donate, come to our events, donate. Instead, they're like, oh, you gave me an app? Oh, you're negotiating group discounts for NYU alumni? I'll use this. Okay. Oh, I met some friends. Oh, I kept in touch on your app, right? So from the point of view of NYU, right, why would they use Facebook?
Well,
Like
it seems like it's an easier sell to just send alumni an email than to convince them to download an app where they'll be given updates on how they should donate anyway. Like, it's possible that that could be beneficial. I don't know how much I like the hyper atomization of people's experiences where there are like a million apps. And I don't even know if I'd call an app decentralized necessarily. But I mean, like you said yourself, right? If you're not the consumer, then you're the product. And in this case, like the only reason people would spend time building this app at negotiating group discounts is if they thought they could make a profitable rate of return on the donations that they would extract from the people who would actually set to download those apps. And
yeah, it would be a win-win for that ecosystem. But yeah, of course, we live in a for-profit society at
sure,
the moment.
sure,
Yeah.
I just don't know what the incentive would be to download the app. I mean, I guess you could, if you could get like discounts to stuff for it. I mean, I guess that would be nice. I'd have to see how effectively that could play out because there are plenty of groups that have advertised their legitimacy on their ability to negotiate group discounts that have never actually been able to do so. It's and I mean NYU, their alumni are all over the world. I don't know, would it be like for particular restaurants in particular boroughs of New
It
York
doesn't,
City?
right. I'm just starting to give you like examples. I'll give you one more just to kind of give you 2 points of contact. So NYU has a problem. This solves their problem by letting their alumni, rather than forget about NYU and says, oh, it's that thing I went to that time in my past, become relevant in their life continuously until they die. Okay, so that's like a massive value add for NYU. Just
The
give you,
only
yeah.
worry I have, and I need to see this pan out, it just the concern that I have is that on an intuitive level, this seems like the exact like BS like Web 2.0 like new design pitch that everyone gets. That you can just app it, you know, you can just like design an app or like find a solution, integration, like tech. And I admit that I'm not entirely familiar with all the specifics of how this works,
And I'll
but
admit, I do
there are
believe in that.
no,
I
right. No,
believe that apps
I
can
know.
help.
I'm just saying, like
Yeah.
there are you could download an app, not care, and then just uninstall it. It seems like the fundamental problem that we're working towards here is something that can't really be addressed, like with technology itself. There are always people trying to sell tech solutions to tech problems, but sometimes the solutions have to be civic. They have to be like national. They have to be government policy. They have to be like a readdress of the way we treat our social spaces, that kind of stuff. Because we're feeding into a constant cycle of competition and like in venture in like a venture capital here as well. You spoke ill of venture capital earlier, but like you would do it too if
We never touched venture
not
capital.
only will you, but you have, I bet, talked to investors to get them to invest into your tech solution to this problem. But
Sure.
that's what Facebook did. They got venture capitalists to invest in their thing to the solution to the previous problem.
So
And it's
I think there's so many interesting topics here. Let me just quickly mention about that.
Mhm.
The revolution right now with tokens versus shares. Okay, when Mark Zuckerberg raised money from Peter Thiel, Clarion Capital, and then he got all these other guys, Greylock and others, to invest. They bought shares in the company. Okay, it's well known that on Wall Street you have investor earnings calls and you have to perform. Okay, so because they're your shareholders, even though they can't vote him out, they do expect the company to earn profits on Wall Street, okay? I think they'll revolt if the company didn't make any profits, and they'll try to replace them any way they can. Now, if Facebook, on the other hand, sold tokens, which is to say, Bitcoin isn't owned by anybody, the network. Ethereum project sold tokens, right? There's now dozens of innovative projects, hundreds of innovative projects. They finance themselves by selling tokens which do not confer any voting ability, any access to financial information of the company. In fact, the company can go bankrupt and the project, like XRP from Ripple or whatever, would live on, okay? And the idea, and again, this is new stuff. This has only happened in the last 3-4 years, but the incentives are actually more correct. The network is owned by the very users of the network, and the participants get the token of the network, and then they sometimes participate in the governance of the network. Although right now the governance is very, very simple. They just take a few variables and they shift them this way or that way. But the point being is that raising money by selling shares is like you're prostituting your company in a way. You better get the right people. Like, we would never sell ourselves to Google. We would never sell ourselves to Facebook because we're trying to disrupt them. I'm not saying they're bad. There has to be an alternative to them, so we can't sell ourselves to them. Now, can we sell ourselves to the public in an IPO? Potentially, yes. That opens us up to short sellers and a lot of other things that Tesla has to deal with, Elon Musk has to deal with, and maybe Facebook could do a corporate takeover then. Who knows? But what I can tell you is, in capitalism, these things are real. Ownership of a company imagine if you could just take over a company and fire everybody, right? So there's laws against that. But with open source protocols and open technologies, there is no fear or need. You can't buy HTTP, you can't buy the email protocol, SMTP, and you can't buy Bitcoin network. So it's just, the question goes away. Like, venture capitalists there's nothing to invest in. There's no company, there's no one controlling everything. And that's the point.
I guess it still seems to me like fundamentally like selling a tech solution to a tech problem, when the overwhelming existing trends seem to indicate that I don't know if this would address centralization. You even say like you would want to use these programs in tandem to like centralized organizations, which means that it wouldn't even get rid of the centralization. It would just mean like you'd have your company, but then the centralization would still exist, which, I mean, I don't know. Are you principally opposed to the idea of addressing big tech through like federal policy?
I've just seen so many bad things happen through big government, states, and then big corporations, and they often join forces. Like I said, capitalism, actually, government is the tool of the capitalists. Whether they were physically assaulting, striking strikers in the 19th century, right, and the mines and everything, that was a capitalist. Enforcing private property, that is a capitalist. The government is always enforcing patents, private property, all these kinds of scarce ideas. If we didn't have that, okay, medicine in the United States would not cost as much because there would be no patents. There would be no one enforcing and trying to call a SWAT team for helping humanity because you're copying a drug and building on.
Sure, but if there was no government, we would still have no child labor laws, and people would work 12-hour days, 7 days a week, right? I mean,
but you wouldn't need that because, yeah.
It's not a matter of whether we'd need it. Just if it wasn't for the government, then corporations would be the only ones dictating our labor laws.
See, I don't say the government. Many libertarians make this mistake. They talk about the government. Governance happens in every organization. There are organizations, right? There are small organizations like a neighborhood watch, a school, a mall, right? They have a government. They have a board. A city has a government. So a large federation, once it gets super large, the problem is the size, okay? The problem is that at that point, every solution is one size fits all. Oh, we break up Facebook. That's going to solve everything. No, the thing is, like, okay, break up Facebook, but that's not the issue. The issue is these things are happening. These things are essentially, people spend time, like, look at these 5 things. I think this is the core of it, right? People spend time inside these things because of the profit motive. That has to go away. People have to live their lives like they used to, spend time with their kids, like raise good kids, instead of sticking them in a public school with the government helping the corporations raise the kids so they could be good corporate drones, and then medicating them with Adderall or not meth, but amphetamines to keep them sitting still.
Okay,
I mean, that just goes against all biology.
Right. I understand that governance can be used negatively, but that doesn't mean that laws can't be a benefit to our society, right? I mean, there have been plenty of instances where the passing of a law is monumentally important to the advancement of some set of civil rights or workers' policies or something like that. And in this case,
absolutely, but often these laws, and again, I'm not talking about abolishing governance or government or laws. I'm simply saying have smaller organizations. And look, you're absolutely right. There was a time when smaller organizations like states and cities had Jim Crow laws, right, and segregation. And it took a federal government in the United States with the Civil Rights Act, right, to smash that. There was a 14th Amendment. There was ending slavery. So like, yes, of course, you could get into like situations within these organizations, like you're talking about, the states could paint themselves into a corner, but you're basically saying take it one step up and the government will be our savior, like the federal government.
Well, saying that we should maybe pass a law about an unprecedented degree of monopolization in our media, I don't think that's saying the government should like control or fix everything. I'm saying this seems to be a problem that can't really be fixed without that kind of legislation, right?
But you do realize that Jim Crow laws were laws passed by states. So like if those laws were not there, private businesses...
I don't think laws are fundamentally good or bad things. I'm just trying to advocate for laws that I think would do good instead of laws that I think would do bad. The Holocaust was also like state action, but so the Holocaust was state action, so was the New Deal. I mean, I don't oppose things based on whether or not the government does them or whether or not they're done through like heavy governance. I oppose them based on their outcomes, right? And when it comes to like big tech, it seems like these corporations control basically everything when it comes to media distribution. They're multi-billion-dollar corporations. They're owned by the wealthiest men on the planet. And it doesn't seem like there's any market incentive that would drive competition away from them in any significant number. So it seems like the best option there would be to take advantage of existing non-monopoly laws and application against them, you know?
That's what's going to happen if the open source community doesn't get its act together and create viable alternatives to Facebook, the way they did with Windows and Mac and Linux and everything else. They've done it with everything, but they haven't done it with big tech, Web 2.0. So unless they get their act together, I totally agree with you that we're going to have no choice. The governments are going to break up these companies and maybe it'll be slightly better, but that's not the solution people need. People need their own technology, their own computer. You could be saying this in the 50s, saying, well, mainframes obviously are way better. They have more software installed. They have better everything. Why would you use a rinky-dink personal computer? And the thing is, back then you would be right. But if you fast forward 20 years later, people have figured out how to make things run. You can run your software and do your thing, and somebody else can be running their thing. And guess what? Nobody wants to run on a mainframe, right? So there is a time, it just takes people time to solve this problem that you're talking about. And in the case of social networks, it's actually very easy to solve. You just have a browser extension that makes sure you're logged in everywhere. In fact, 1Password is an approximation of that, right? It's basically you're logged into LastPass or 1Password, and at least you can click get into the site. It's not social, but at least it's like a seamless thingamajig now, right? So that's improved your life. So that's created a feeling like you don't have to remember your passwords now across all websites. Take that times 100 and you get essentially where we're going to be in 10 years. So no, I don't think...
I guess I would have to defer to the future then, because I feel like we have a history of like open source social media projects that have currently like no people who participate in them because they never are able to keep up with the kind of convenience and accessibility of big projects. But I don't know. Things can always change. I mean, I guess we'll have to see. We're actually 20 minutes over time now.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know what the time frame was.
It's a testament to the intrigue of the subject, I guess. I do appreciate you coming on. I guess I have to look more at like open source stuff in the future so I can more effectively retort. Yes? Can
I just say for 1 minute the kind of world I'd like to see, because I think, and I'd love to hear solutions, what kind of world you'd like to see, if you don't mind. I can close that way.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. I would like to see a world where people are getting a UBI. I do believe that in consumer choice, school vouchers, for example, but if you take it all the way to its logical conclusion, you're basically getting a UBI, give them cash. And I think that there should be a Medicare for all. There are single payer systems. Vouchers for schools are a single payer system too. So a form of UBI and single payer systems where there's one buyer, one payer negotiating on behalf of everybody so you can get the best prices. Having that system, I think it can free people up from having to work 40-hour work weeks. They can start working 30 and 20 hours. They can spend time with their kids. They don't have to use public school and government school to essentially neglect their kids in order to survive or buy that fancy new iPhone that they want to buy or pay rent, which is super expensive. I would like those people to then be free to follow their religions or raise their kids, or in this case, science and open source. Give it away. Just publish your scientific findings like we've been doing for hundreds of years. That's a very good endeavor, helps humanity a lot. Open source software, Linux, GitHub, helps humanity a lot. Those truck drivers who are laid off, they could be doing some of that sometime. They don't have to, but in a libertarian world, what would happen is people have a really nice safety net. They wouldn't have this PTSD of having to earn more money, more money, more money, and they have millions, but they have to make 10 million. They would work on projects, not because the projects pay, but because the project's fucking cool. And that's how we could actually have these alternatives faster. So I would like to see a world like that. And yeah, of course, I would want to tax certain things. I would want to tax pollution, non-biodegradable plastic, factory farms, to make them less competitive. But then I would take that money and redistribute it back to the people as a universal basic income. So in other words, I'd like to see the UBI be funded by what's called Pigovian taxes, which is taxes on things you want less of. And then you wouldn't have the yellow vest protests. You wouldn't have people saying that the taxes fall disproportionately on us who have to go to work, but they'll actually say, please raise the taxes on fossil fuels because we would like more UBI. So that's how you shape public policy without having a jobs guarantee, Green New Deal, or anything else. You simply tax the thing you don't want, right? And then you redistribute it to the people, give them total freedom of how to spend that money and how to spend their time. And I think we need that society because if we don't, then I believe Andrew Yang's apocalypse with the robots, we have to get rid of the dependence on the pyramid of social security, where there has to be always more children and more children to pay for the previous generation. With robots, it's not going to be the case anymore. Everyone's going to be so productive, one person will do the job of 10 people, that we can finally be rich and free and be building open source software. I know that sounds utopian, but I think, like everything else I'm saying, I don't even have to bitch. It will just happen. The only thing is, if we don't do this now, then we're going to live in a world where Facebook creates its own currency. Amazon controls all the shipping and the products and everything. Our governments and our states are going to tell us, yeah, we'll break them up and we'll do this. But really, they're just as bad in a sense. Yeah, they're democratic, sure. But we've seen governments all over the place kill people. And generally, I would rather have a Steve Jobs create one of these and change the world. I would rather have a Mark Zuckerberg or a technologist create anything you see on this screen to help the world. Can you name anything a US president has done to that extent to help the world? The most they can do is not fuck up the economy or something, or not kill less people. So yeah, I would rather have solutions come from the technology people, and I would rather put money into the hands of the everyday person for free, for nothing. I think living in the 21st century is a gift in and of itself, and we didn't earn it, and we're not paying Isaac Newton, and we're not paying all those people who are dead. It's a free gift. So why can't somebody have also free healthcare? I have air conditioning. Why can't they? So that's kind of my viewpoint, and I want to hear your reaction to it, but I also want to hear kind of what you see as the solutions to the problems that you see today.
I want the government to break up big tech companies because I think that right now they're a monopoly and there's absolutely no incentive or need whatsoever for them to improve their product or to compete for people's interest because they are capable of exploiting flawed market trends to ensure that they will always dominate their given sectors. I don't like the claim that I think that people like the Apple guy have contributed.
Job?
Steve Jobs have contributed more good to the world. First of all, I mean, he's not the engineer who made the phone. He was one of those venture capitalists who funded its development. And second of all, the only reason we're ever even able to enjoy the luxuries of modern technology is because society is stable enough, thanks to, in large part, the effective governance of the elected representatives who we see fit to vote for. I mean, you can't have Apple in a feudal state. You can't have anything in a country ridden by war. Syria isn't producing smartphones. The stability that is a product of the political decision-making of the collective democratic will of this country is the reason why we produce or does anything, or produce or do anything. But yeah, no, we should break up the big 10 companies because I think they're super cucked, and then I think that we should use federal power to break them apart, and that I think there should probably be some... I don't know if... So we should probably implement some kind of laws against targeted advertisements, or at least laws that that can be used to hurt companies that sell data past a certain point. Some stuff is fairly straightforward and obvious, but... Excuse me, goodness. Some stuff really isn't. And I think that... I think we have to recognize that we're actually going to have to cut down on convenience on this. Sometimes convenience is actually destructive and detrimental. We get convenience out of selling data because it means that Amazon knows what to show us in our Twitter adverts. However, I still think that the social consequences of this are destructive. This is an externality. The effects of monopolization, centralization, these aren't really experienced by your average consumer, not in ways they understand. So I think that it's up to the government to address these problems more so than it is the responsibility of consumers to more responsibly consume in a way to disempower those institutions.
Well, I just want to say it's a pleasure to talk to you. As you can tell, this can go on for another 2 hours.
Yes,
maybe
for sure. I appreciate you coming on to speak with me. Seriously.
I also appreciate it. Look, I had a feeling this was going to be really good. I'll let you know how my talk with Noam Chomsky goes next week.
Yeah, as long as you remember to tell him hi. If you don't remember to tell him that, then I don't want to hear about it, okay?
Yeah, I'm just going to fuck off. But I'll say this. I would love to come on again to talk about, for another hour, your views, because I feel like mostly we've been examining mine, and I wanted to really examine yours. But I do want to ask one last question, just really quickly. Bolsonaro was elected democratically. Duterte was elected democratically, right? And so on. My question is, democracies do have people who then turn around and sell the rainforest or try to kill 100,000 people they call drug dealers or evict natives and so on. So how do you know that in a democracy, you still won't have bad outcomes?
Oh, you totally will. We had Trump. I mean, you can totally get bad outcomes. I think that if we lived in a country with weaker institutions, Trump probably would have been running his own death camps. But democracy doesn't always produce perfect results, but you can tailor systems within a democracy to increase the likelihood of getting those good results, you know? So I think that a breakup of big tech, in this case, would actually be preferable because there are a lot of financial incentives to keeping Republican voters consuming their own brand of voodoo horse shit or whatever the fuck leads them to think the world is the way they think it is. So if you could break up those systems, you'd probably be less likely to get negative outcomes in the future. Also, the moving away from like highly centralized reporting has led to an explosion in the number of socialists online and just doing on-the-ground advocacy. That's also super great. It's also a step in the right direction for me. So we can tailor the systems to our benefit.
Yay, bread tube. All right, guys.
Yay, bread tube. Thank you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. All right, let's meet again.
Have a wonderful day.
You too. Thank you.